Hello, welcome back to my channel if you're returning, or welcome if you're new. My name is Julie, and on this channel, at least as it's been so far, I tend to share about faith and God and just my journey so far as a Christian. I would be interested to see another person kind of updating as they go along, I guess. So that's what this is. However, some things have been shifting for me mentally, spiritually, that has made me unsure of where this little experiment might go going forward in the future, or even in the near present. I don't know. Reason for that is, well, that's what I'm going to be getting into in this video. So if you're interested in these types of topics, stay tuned. Things have actually gotten better for me since the last upload, where I was talking about going through a dark night of the soul, experiencing most likely some pretty intense spiritual warfare. I've been gifted with this sort of rest and this season where it's not even really waiting, but it is a season of kind of discernment. I have a feeling that my life will look different than it does right now at some point. I may not have the time and space that I do right now. I more than likely won't. So I'm trying to utilize it to the best of my abilities and really stay present in this current blessing. I think a lot of times we can have this sense of urgency to, it's still like this worldliness left over in me. Of course, I'm only a year in. I'm not, but there's this sense when you're in the world that you yourself have to really be strategic and think and plan and push yourself forward on this self-determined trajectory. And there's a place for that. There's a place of kind of having an understanding of where you would like to see yourself in the next few years and what you envision your life to be like, and what kind of desires has God placed in your heart. I've been really trying to think on this and pray on this and listen to guidance on this. Every single day when I wake up, I say, give me the eyes to see, the ears to hear, and a heart to feel, wherever you are guiding me, and not my will, but thy will be done. And that sounds all good and dandy until maybe you start getting signs in your life that God is leading you in a direction that might call you to a higher level of holiness, which is ultimately the goal of any vocation that we are called to, whether it is marriage, whether it is religious life, whether it is being a celibate, devout layperson, whatever it is. All three of those paths are going to call you to a higher level of holiness. And that is, I think, the point of your vocation ultimately. And when it comes to marriage, this has really been interesting for me because my whole life I've kind of assumed that I would get married one day and I would be a wife and a mom, and I've always looked forward to that. And I've always been a relationship girl, and so that seems like the most natural kind of option for me. But I've started to just be kind of open to, like, well, thy will be done. I don't know what God's will is for my life. I don't know if married life and having a family is his will for me. I think I would be happy if it is, but it does call you higher than my old secular self perceived marriage and being a mother, if that makes sense. Because before I was a Christian, I had a few opportunities to get married. Thankfully, I didn't understand the sanctity of marriage, that it is a sacrament. And I'm glad I didn't go through with those relationships, those potential engagements. I'm glad I didn't do that, because marriage really is, from a biblical perspective, from a Christian perspective, especially from a Catholic perspective, it is a sacrament. It is now you, your spouse, and God joined together in a lifelong covenant. And the goal of marriage is to sanctify you towards holiness. It's not necessarily just towards your personal happiness. You and your spouse are trying to get each other to heaven, and obviously your children, if you're blessed enough to have them. And it is for life. Divorce is really not in the picture with the exception of the worst possible things befalling you, you're not really even thinking about divorce. When you get married, as a Christian, as a Catholic, that's a lifelong vow you just made for real. And people in the secular world will have weddings and they'll say those same vows or similar vows, but they're thinking in their head, well, if this doesn't work out, I can get divorced. Like, I know 10 other people who got married and got divorced and now they have kids and they're a single parent, and like that's kind of the norm in the regular world, so to speak, at this point in the modern world. And that's not good. Obviously, that's caused a lot of destruction and just the stability of our society, and don't get me started on all of that. A lot of us have been raised by single parents, myself included, and I think we come out of that with immense respect for our parents and their sacrifices that they made for us, while at the same time knowing and witnessing that that was not ideal for them, that was not natural for them, that was very, very, very hard for them. I'm sure marriage and raising children in general is quite challenging, but that's like unnaturally so, right? So anyway, coming into this understanding of what it means to get married as a Christian, and specifically as a Catholic, because I don't even know if I could get off this path even if I wanted to towards Catholicism. That was kind of starting to form in my head a little bit before I moved here, but as soon as I went to that first Latin Mass, it was done. It was done. There's nothing. It was done. You can go back and watch that video to see what I mean with that. So that's really the only thing that I'm quite sure about at this point, that I believe God is calling me to be a Catholic, and I don't do anything halfway. If I'm going to be committed to something, I'm committed to it, and I want to be devoted to it, and I want to truly live that out to the best of my abilities. And so when I think about marriage at this point in time, I'm thinking about a Catholic marriage. I'm thinking about the idea of raising a Catholic family and what that would look like. That is so wildly different than what I grew up with. I grew up with a single mother who was doing her absolute best, but, we struggled, and no religion. I didn't grow up going to church. I didn't grow up hearing about Christ. I didn't grow up with any of that. Just a secular upbringing. And so to live a devout Catholic life, especially as a wife and a mother, it's kind of the higher level of what I've always kind of seen for myself in a way. And I do have an example of my grandma and my grandpa, who've been married for 50 plus years, and the beginning of their marriage was a relatively Catholic one, at least. And so I have like kind of a little bit of an example in my life that I could point to somewhat. But the point is that that path asks more of me, in the sense that even the idea of a Catholic wedding, I have such a small family, I have such a small group of tight knit friends that we've kind of like gone off in separate directions already at this point, but there's like 5 people I would invite to my wedding max. So like this idea in my mind of like this fanfare, this Catholic church wedding, even that gives me a little bit of anxiety, as weird as that is. But it's a sacrament. It is something between you, your spouse, and God. And so just kind of going to Mass a few times now and experiencing specifically the Latin Mass, I'm like, yeah, this is probably, it's not so much about what you want. And that's kind of the feeling you get at the Latin Mass specifically that I really like in general. Like the priest is facing away from you, they're facing towards the altar, and so it's like we're all trying to go towards God. It's not this super catered to you sort of church experience, which I don't know about that. For me, that just feels a little bit off. I don't know. So anyway, when I'm there and I'm sitting there, I'm like, okay, if I'm called to marriage, it's probably gonna be in this setting. So there's that. Kids, I've always wanted to have kids. I've always wanted to have children. So I think about, okay, if I myself am on this path of converting to Catholicism, and from there you are obligated to raise your kids up in the Catholic faith. It's not like a choice. It's like, yeah, no, that's, as a parent, that's your like responsibility at that point. So I think about that now, like however far in the future however far ahead I'm thinking of that now, or if I'm even called to that, I think about that of how would I raise my kids in a way that I don't know, allows questions and isn't like shoving it down their throat. I hope that if I am called to that, I can lead more by example and with passion and love, and not like this dry sort of, yeah, this is just what we do. Like if I was a kid raised in that, I know I would have fell away from the faith. So if I'm if I'm called to have kids, I know any kids of mine are going to be like, so what's why are we doing this, you know, because I would have done that. So anyway, I think about all that, and I saw this image recently on X. I still want to call it Twitter, but I guess I'm going to call it X, of this image of like a husband and wife, their hands kind of clasped together on their wedding day. She's wearing this beautiful glove, he's like wearing a suit, and their hands are nailed together with Christ's hand on the cross. And that's like the image of a Catholic marriage, I think, kind of summarized as a single woman. I think that's what it is. So that's just very different than how I always kind of perceived marriage in my head as a secular person. To me, it was like, I don't know, a stepping stone into womanhood, and kind of like a rite of passage, and like you're joining this club of like married women, and you know, it's romantic, and it's like, you know, maybe you get swept up in and just like randomly get married one day in Vegas or something. Like I would have been that girl to do that for sure. I almost did that. And that's how I saw marriage. And in the back of my mind, you know, obviously nobody wants to get divorced, but in the back of my mind as a secular person, I was like, yeah, if it doesn't work out, like I can just get divorced. Like that's what everybody does. Now it's like, no, this is way more of a serious decision than that. That is not really even on the table. So I've just been kind of like, all right, I don't know, God. You lead me on all that. Obviously, there's this temptation we have as people to try and figure out, okay, do you want me to take actions towards this, or do you want me to kind of wait and leave it in your hands? Especially, I think as women, you know, the Bible says that a wife is something a man finds, essentially. A good wife is something that a man finds. That's very much paraphrased. That's not the exact quote, but that's the gist. That as women, we don't necessarily need to seek out a husband. Now, can we put ourselves in places where we could be seen and found by him? Yeah, I think we probably should do that. But I don't know. So I'm not really sure about that. I'm not on any dating apps right now. I used to be on apps. I've met people through apps before. Maybe I'll go on an app again. I don't know. The trouble with apps is that, first of all, it feels like you're shopping for a person. And as much as I love shopping, that feels a little dehumanizing, I think. And it perpetuates this kind of mindset we have as millennials, Gen Z, of just, there's so many options that anybody we're dating is just replaceable. Like we've kind of lost this old-fashioned way of dating and courting where you're kind of like focused on this one person, and you're not necessarily, back in the day, I assume, because it wasn't as easy to find another person, or so it seemed easy. You weren't as easy to likely to just throw in the towel when the first kind of conflict or thing comes upon you, right? Now it's very easy to just hop on an app and feel like you could replace this person. I think that's very dehumanizing, and there's something very odd about that, and unusual and unnatural. The devil loves to tempt us, and you know, if you give him an inch, he'll take a mile, right? So I think especially if you're on a secular dating app as a Christian, there's definitely needles in the haystacks out there. Don't get me wrong, but I think you have to be extra discerning of what is making you swipe right on this person, right? Is it just because you're physically attracted to them, but their profile says they're an atheist and they love listening to, no offense to metalheads, heavy metal, death rock sort of stuff? Let's think about this. I think we should really try our absolute best to never get into a relationship with somebody that we would need to convert, that we would need to convince, that they would maybe go along with our preferences or whatever we're trying to do just to kind of appease us. I think especially as women, because biblically a man is called to be the spiritual leader of the household. And so you do want to see that he's capable of that when you're dating him, obviously. Otherwise, I don't think marrying him is a good idea, especially if there's not really an option for divorce. You have to be a lot more thoughtful and I think even more discerning during the dating process from this mindset, especially because now here's the big thing. Ideally, you are not sleeping with this person until your wedding night and beyond. Now, that is very different than the secular kind of rhetoric that many girls like myself have unfortunately grown up with shows like Sex and the City, which now looking back is literally a show all about fornication and just all sorts of other sins. Like, that's what the show is about. That's the title of the show. I never realized that. So although I always kind of had a sense that there was something a little bit off about this like modern feminist rhetoric of date like a man, that's empowering, whatever, I was like, I don't think so. I don't think it is, because just as women, we're more vulnerable, and it's just the brain chemistry doesn't make sense. There's so many things about that didn't make sense to me. So thankfully, I never dove too deep in it, but still, I've had long-term relationships, and in a perfect world, I wish I had saved myself for marriage. I really do, but I'm doing that now. So God is merciful, and it's never too late to turn things around and really dedicate yourself to a path of purity and like genuine purity, not this kind of like put upon you purity culture that maybe you don't fully understand, that it really is in our best interest to save the physical act for your husband or your wife, because that is just like a totally different thing that you're in now than just this person who could just get up and leave. And now it's just, that's not God's plan for us. And I think you can feel that if you have done that in the past. You can feel that it's not his perfect plan for us. It's not his will for us, right? So anyway, the point is that you have to learn how to, how do I say this? You have to learn how to reconfigure what you feel like is normal while dating, and you have to also reconfigure what you think is normal as a single adult person. In the secular world, for example, there's this rhetoric that entertaining yourself, so to say, is healthy and good and more than normal. It's encouraged. Well, the church actually says that that's abusing yourself and essentially the temple of God that your body happens to be now. It is maladaptive. It is not something that we would see in normal, healthy, ideal situations for humans or for primates, right? So from a Catholic perspective, that's considered a sin. And it's actually a mortal sin once you know that it's a sin. I don't know if other Christian denominations, so to speak, would say the same, but yes, it's considered to be a mortal sin. So yeah, there is that. I think as a woman, we are most sensitive to this realm of temptation in a certain time of the month, and the rest of the time I think it's very manageable. And so I think that's a blessing. I feel for men who are just wired a little bit differently, and they are much more sensitive to being triggered towards this sin and towards lust in general. That's a generalization. Obviously, there are women who have higher levels of testosterone due to PCOS and other things. That's another topic altogether. But yeah, that's another thing too, of just living a single, celibate, devout life is, I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding of that too, of especially from a secular perspective, oh, those people, they must be so repressed. They must just be like bottling all that up and have nowhere to put it. And that's not necessarily the case, actually. I've come across the theology of the body, which is super, super interesting. I've just only barely touched on that as well, but it's essentially, it comes from the writings of Saint Pope John Paul II, and it's all about human sexuality from this lens and how we're supposed to go about this and how we're supposed to think about this. And long story short, I haven't fully gotten into it yet, but to summarize, no, we are not called to just completely repress and ignore the natural, built-in, healthy system that we've been given as human beings. That feeling, that mechanism is what has and continues to allow us to exist. And in marriage is so beautiful and such a gift. But outside of marriage, it's just that's not what it's for. And it's not just for your own selfishness either, in a way, because there's no way for you to engage in fornication or in self entertainment, so to speak, without evoking lust. Think about it. There's no way for you to reach whatever destination you're trying to go to in either of those scenarios without invoking lust. And lust is different than healthy attraction. It serves a very different purpose or leads you in a very different direction. Lust is selfish, whereas like healthy attraction within a marriage can be selfless in a way. It draws you towards giving of yourself in that way and creating life, right? So that's the purpose of our sexuality as human beings. That is the purpose. And I'm sure a lot of people in this more modern, woke, feminist mindset would be like, oh, that's so archaic, that's so old-fashioned, that's so oppressive, it's so whatever. Listen, this is just what I'm learning. And I find it really interesting to kind of chew on these things and kind of learn about them in real time. And it's just like really interesting to, I'm in my late 20s right now. I just turned 29 this November. And it's really interesting to just kind of have this new way of seeing the world, new way of thinking, new way of living, new way of everything. Kind of like all of a sudden. It's really interesting, just even psychologically speaking. So yeah, I've been thinking about that, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, long story short, I don't know what my vocation is. I don't know what God's will for my life is. I'm trying to discern that. I'm trying to be as clear of a vessel as I possibly can, which for me means prayer and study. And just like even when it comes to prayer too, something else that I'm drawn to just even reading the Carmelites is this emphasis on contemplative prayer, which from my understanding, from a Carmelite perspective at least, it doesn't mean, because we hear contemplative and we think thinking, like we're thinking. No, it's actually just being present with God in silence, like just being there. And that's different than Eastern meditation too, where you're trying to like clear your mind. This is different. I don't know how to explain how it's different because I'm still like kind of, I don't know, I'm not like actively trying to learn these things or pick these things up. This is just like naturally how things are going for me in a way that it feels so nourishing to make space for silence with God. And so I do like to talk to him and pray from the heart. I do like to pray the rosary. Something new has been happening with the rosary actually for me that I think would be interesting to mention. I've started to kind of notice this sensation when I'm praying the rosary that I feel like I'm a cup of water. And as I pray the rosary, it's like when you put a tea bag into the water and the tea starts to infuse into that water, it becomes this new thing. That's how I feel lately when I pray the rosary, that I'm just like being infused with something that is not innately of myself, but only makes me better. It is so cool. It is so cool. I have noticed as I've been praying the rosary, and I don't know, some people could say it's a placebo. I have a friend who's tried to argue that it's a placebo. It's a good placebo, but it's a placebo nonetheless. I don't know, because When you start off the rosary, you are praying on the first three little beads. You're praying for an increase in faith, in hope, and in charity. Praying for an increase in charity has been really, really interesting for me because, full disclosure, I am a naturally passionate person. I am not afraid to debate. I am not afraid to argue, even. I'm not afraid of conflict, okay? That's not necessarily something that I'm like super proud of about myself. I have a lean towards that, right? Praying for an increase in charity has just kind of naturally over these last few months. The way that I notice it the most is when I'm encountering people who have a different viewpoint than I do, a different belief system than I do, or they're also Christians, but they are arguing against Catholicism, for example. The old me would fight to the death to defend my perspective, to convince them of my perspective. Like, that's my natural personality, honestly. I don't know if that's very ladylike or whatever, but like, listen, to be a very passionate person, there's a lot of sides of that coin, right? And it's taken me like all of my 20s to even be able to harness that, even in general. But as I've been praying the rosary, moving more towards Catholicism, I've noticed that when I come upon these situations, it's not taking me any effort. Hear me when I say this. It's not taking me any effort to not argue with these people. As a naturally argumentative person, I feel calm. I feel like in those moments that I'm starting to be able to discern if there's an opening for genuine dialogue in that moment or if there's not. And if there's not, I really do see matters of faith, matters of God. Yes, there is an intellectual component to it. There is definitely room for reason, for logic, for theological exploration, absolutely. But at the end of the day, only God can open someone's heart towards Christ, towards Himself, towards the church. Only God can do that. We can plant a seed, but only God can make it grow. And actually, I have something actually to share with you on that regard. So somebody commented, weren't you taking theology courses? What's going on with that? So I have an update on that. I'm gonna grab a book actually. I just want to share this with you. Okay, so first of all, this is a book that was gifted to me. It's called All Saints. It is daily reflections on saints, prophets, and witnesses of our time. This book is amazing, and it's not what you think. It's I just pick up this book. It's by Robert Ellsberg. It includes people who are canonized saints, who are not canonized in the Catholic Church, who weren't even Catholic. Some of them weren't even Christian, but these people all lived out the Christian virtues to such an extent that their lives are noteworthy. All of our lives are noteworthy, but their lives are worth exploring. And they're just these little tiny chapters each day. And what I like to do is in the morning, I'll read a little bit of the Bible, and in the daytime, I like to read the New Testament. Right now, I'm rereading John. So I'll read a little bit of the Bible, and then I'll pick up this book and I'll go to the day that it is, and I'll just be like, okay, how did this person live out the gospel? Like, let's see. And it's so interesting. So anyway, somebody asked me, weren't you taking theology courses? Like, what happened with that? I did start doing the short courses from the Augustine Institute, and I will say from the few modules that I went through, fantastic course, great professors, very, very interesting. But I found myself one day in prayer, and I was asking God just how to proceed with everything. I was in the running for a job, I was working through these courses, I was asking Him how to proceed. And when it came to studying theology in a very structured way, I felt, as I was praying, I felt Him say, cancel it. I was like, cancel it? I mean, isn't it good to, learn more about you in this sort of intellectual way? And what I felt Him respond was, it is too beyond you right now. I want you to be like a little child. So I was like, okay. So I literally got up from praying and I just went and canceled it in that moment. So in this book, All Saints, on January 12th, they featured a woman. Her name was Mev Paleo. And she studied theology. She earned multiple graduate degrees in theology. And here's what it says about that. This is like a sentence. But her studies only confirmed her belief in the need for a new language of faith, a language addressed not only to the head, but to the heart. As she said, I believe less in theology and more in God, because I believe that in theology, there's only so much you can say about God. That pretty much sums up how I feel about that. At this point, I think I'm a thinker. Clearly, I tend to kind of go on tangents here about fairly heady philosophical concepts. I don't know. But I have to say that I'm a little bit more of a feeler. And I think because I have kind of embraced that instruction that I felt God giving me of, I want you to be like a little child in the faith. And I've noticed even in reading other books like The Imitation of Christ, you know, Thomas A. Kempis says it's better to be an illiterate peasant in the faith than the most educated scholarly person. I think the reason for that might be that you get to know the heart of God, which is so incredibly vast. That's something that I've started to really kind of understand or experience that I don't know if I would get to if I was really, really focused on only the intellectual, only the logical. So again, there's a place for both, but personally for me, and I'm sure there is an aspect that I'm a woman. I approach things from a more feminine kind of vantage point, I guess. And I have zero shame in that. I don't subscribe to this idea that only masculinity is respectable. In the sense of, as a woman, I don't need to imitate a man in order to be of value. That's been another interesting kind of factor of sharing too, is that I've noticed by looking at my analytics here that a lot of you guys are men. Like 90% of you guys are men, which, you know what? I appreciate you guys. I'm glad you're here. I hope you're getting something out of this channel. At the same time, I wish more of you were women. I would love to attract more women to this little growing community thing, whatever I have going on here. But yes, I'm aware that most of you, as of now, are men, and men tend to be less of feelers, more of thinkers. That's a generalization, of course, but generally speaking, I think that men tend to appreciate and respect logic and reason and just these kind of intellectual arguments. But I'm a woman and I approach things from a feminine perspective. I'm not gonna change that for you. Sorry. If you feel that I approach things from a perspective that is too emotional, too feely for you, that's totally fine. But like, I don't care really. I'm not gonna change that because that is what God is calling me to do. That is what feels right to me to do. And I am experiencing fruits from pursuing things from that kind of lens, I guess you could say. So yeah, that's been another factor too of just, I'm not sure what direction this channel is going to go in, given the fact that I am finding it increasingly challenging to discuss my faith as I go along, because it's like it's burrowing deeper into my heart and it's becoming almost slightly closer to the chest. And that depth is encouraging me to spend more time in prayer and in silence and in contemplation. And that is not really the usual style of these sort of, you know, Christian creators where you're getting on here and you're talking about a certain topic and you're given almost like a sermon sort of thing. I'm like going in a totally different opposite direction than that. I don't know like where that's gonna lead me. I would love to be one of those creators who's consistently uploading every single week and really engaged and all that. But I just feel like I need to let things simmer and marinate a little bit more. I try not to come on here with totally half-baked thoughts. Most of them are. But I'm trying to, I don't know, provide something. So these sort of things, they take time to kind of settle in, and it takes time to understand maybe what I'm learning or experiencing, what might be relevant to share with you, what might be interesting to share with you. If you have any ideas or suggestions of what you would like to hear about more on this channel, please let me know. I'm more than open to your suggestions. I love hearing from you guys. I genuinely do. I think 99.9% of you are just amazing, thoughtful, genuine people, and that in itself is really cool to attract those types of people on the internet. I don't take that for granted. So yeah, that's where I find myself. So I guess we'll see. Thank you for listening and watching, as always, and I will catch you in the next one. God bless.